Today's confession comes from Christoph. Thank you, Christoph, for today's tale. Forgiven or not, we shall see. Simon and Collective, many years ago, back in the mist of time, i.e. the mid-70s, I attended an all-boys grammar and boarding school with aspirations to become a proper public school, you know, like St Custard's. The headmaster was ex-Harrow. To use a footballing analogy, we were mid-championship with a faint hope of making the playoffs.
Okay.
However, from the sporting point of view, we were sometimes punching above our weight in the major sports. Rugby, hockey and cricket, that kind of thing. And my year were pretty good at most of them. Occasionally there were athletics matches against other local schools, and one in particular is the subject of my confession. It was at a local private school who were, again using the football analogy, at the top of Division 1 at best, but fancied themselves in the sporting arena considerably. I was pretty decent at most sports, but seemed to be rather good at throwing the discus. In fact, I held the school record at the time. Anyway, I was selected to throw for the school for this meeting. Once our competition got underway, it was my turn to throw quite early on. And of course, one didn't practice or anything as demeaning as that.
Yeah.
So I just strolled up to the line, picked up the nearest discus, and got into my work. Well, there were almost gasps. The distance I managed, over 54 metres, in fact, which was pretty good for a 17-year-old boy at the time. Just to give some kind of context, I think the world record is like 74 metres.
Wow,
like that,
okay.
So I've done pretty good.
Okay.
The discus came out really well and everything felt good, but 54 metres, that was incredible. Of course, you had to retrieve your own discus after the throw had been measured. And I have to admit, I strutted like a peacock for every single step. That's right. 54 metres. Hello, everyone. Yes. Swagger, swagger. It is good, isn't it? Yeah. Swagger, swagger, preen. I mean, I know I'm good, but 54 metres.
Yeah.
Swagger, swagger, preen, saunter, and grandstand. However, between us, Father Simon, as I bent down and picked the discus up, I noticed something wasn't quite right. It felt rather light. My recollection is that the senior boy's discus was 2 kg, but as I walked back towards the throng that had amassed to witness this amazing throw, I noticed this one was only 1.5. A junior discus.
Oh, that'll be why.
Now, I had two choices, of course, and obviously I chose the easy one and said nothing, and continued to bask in the glory of that magnificent throw and dropped the offending projectile in amongst all the others so no one would know. I had 2 other throws to make, of course, which I made with the correct projectile, and they were pretty good. I seem to recall around school record distance, but nowhere near as that superb and still talked about 54 metres. To divert any suspicions from the officials and other boys, I feigned a shoulder strain after both and asked for treatment when my throws were done. I, of course, won that match by many, many metres, and in fact would have won with the other throws, but I convinced myself that it was quite okay to have cheated so blatantly, as we were up against toffs and cads, who wouldn't even have been there if it hadn't been for the oppression of the masses.
Correct.
By the Times rich list obsessed parents.
Yeah.
And so I continued to bask in the glory, bluster and gloat, flourish and grandstand yet again. I have never cheated so blatantly in sport since, and I went on to become a mortgage broker for many years. In fact, I still am, so maybe I've been cheating ever since. And then he puts in brackets, that's an in-joke.
Okay.
Well, I think it's an in-joke that we all got. So I crave forgiveness, not from all the other schools that I thrashed 54 metres, but from my mates who were amazed at my skill, but were always sure something dodgy had occurred, but they could never quite prove it. Ha-ha! Now everyone knows the truth. Halcyon days, says Christoph. Well, it's a shocking tale of cheating at sport. Who knew that kind of thing happened? Sister Jackie.
Well, I think I'm going to have to take, shockingly, a harsh line.
I know.
Because my feeling is, I think, you know, Matt and I sort of have a similar social outlook, and my feeling is that there's some toffee-nosed little Herbert who got beaten that day and went on to become a tyrannical, psychopathic CEO, making everyone's life a misery because of the injustice of it all. So I'm afraid unforgiven.
Okay, Unforgiven from the very harsh Jackie Brambles. Brother Matthew, brother from another gutter.
I mean, I'm obviously going to forgive here just because of the class war, but also, isn't it the system that's at fault here? Surely this school that's got the croquet lawn and the ponies and no doubt jousting and everything else going on. Well, my guess is they did. If they've got all of that and you haven't got someone who's in charge of looking after the discus and making sure it's the right weight, then what kind of school are you? And didn't they teach you that at Eton? Thought not. So for that reason, I'm going to forgive.
So for no reason at all other
correct.
than class war.
Class war.
Okay, so it's looking pretty bad in the studio, but do you forgive Christoph? Yes or no? The people's verdict is expected, please. You text 61054, first word is silent. Meantime, we had a confession from Christoph. He was all about throw the discus, but he had the wrong discus. Hence, an incredible throw of 54 metres. But because he was up against the private school, he thinks that's possibly he might get away with it. Let's see what the people's verdict is.
So Gary in Liverpool says not forgiven. He was arrogant, strutting up to the discus, and he should have owned up. But Mitch in Swansea says forgiven. It was never his fault in the first place. Why did they give him a 1.5 kilo discus? I blame the school, stroke teachers, etc. And Kath in Hampshire says total forgiveness. Up the underdogs. Daddy probably paid for a special measuring tape for the St Custard's toffs.
Could you say measuring tape with more contempt?
I don't think I could.
I don't think so. Maybe you have a confession and you'd like to exchange it for a smart speaker. Send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. And Jackie joins us now because she's part of the confessional collective, just like she used to be. Evening to you, Ms. Bramble, Sister Jackie there.
How are we doing?
Yeah, what have you got lined up on your show then tonight?
Oh, I've got crackers tonight, honestly. Sit down next to me because we've got Tim Booth of James, hot off the heels of his guest appearance at the Coldplay gig last week in Manchester. He'll be on our great conversation tonight.
Excellent. Okay, so many reasons to stay listening at 7 o'clock. Here we go with tonight's confession. Like I say, 15 certificate for sustained horror.
Really? Oh.
You'll understand when we get there.
Okay.
Comes from Timothy. Forgive me, Father Simon, for I have sinned. I need to take you back 15 years. It's 2008, and I was living somewhere in the Midlands at the time of my sinning. I was a wagon driver. I'm not quite sure what that means. Anyway, I was a wagon driver, and at the time I was on a mid-afternoon start, so that regularly that meant that I would finish around 0100 to 0230 hours in the morning.
Okay.
Afternoon to the early hours. Now, my last day of every week was Friday. I mean, as it is for most people. And my girlfriend's sister, who we're going to call Scarlett, would regularly message me on the tail end of a night out asking for a lift home. Be quite clear that she'd been on the sherry. She would get in my car and she'd be steaming. Who knew sherry had such properties? Anyway, also she was particularly loud, which really, really irritated me. This would happen on a weekly basis, and it started to really, really annoy me. I believe, Father Simon, it would annoy pretty much anyone, to be honest. There are taxis that can perform this service. Or you could just not drink sherry. Mm-hmm. Or you could drink sherry at home. Or you could stay in and watch TV and drink tea and biscuits. Anyway, here's where my sinning begins. Scarlett rang me as per usual, but in a worse state than normal, begging for a lift. I was actually in a bit of a bad mood anyway, and she just made things worse. Picked her up, strapped her in, took her home, and this is where my mind started to tick over. I remembered that she had an incredible fear of clowns.
Oh no.
Coulrophobia, to give it its proper name. I'm not sure where this might have come from. Quite possibly from seeing Tim Curry play Pennywise the Clown in Stephen King's It. Hiya, Georgie.
Oh, there it is.
When delivered from a drain.
Of course.
Tim Curry is.
Impressive.
Also, clowns are weird. The makeup and the shoes is just wrong. Also, the Joker in Batman, all wrong.
Right.
Over the space of the next week, here's a sentence I have never said out loud before, and it's never been used in a confession before. Over the space of the next week, I purchased a 6-foot inflatable clown. He was supposed to look jolly and cheery, with the bright colours, big smiling face, big feet and so on, but it didn't. The next week, when the inevitable call came, I was ready to put my plan into action. Phone rings, sherry's been consumed, pick up, steaming, as ever. The usual drill. Took her to her house. It's a house that I shared with her sister, and she put herself to bed. I waited downstairs till she was in a deep slumber, and it was time. I inflated the clown and sneaked upstairs stealthily.
What?
Dodging
Oh, no.
the creaky floorboards like a ninja, into the spare room, and I tucked the clown into bed with her.
What? Into bed?
Proudly, I crept into my room, into my bed, and dozed off. The next thing I heard was screams, an awfully loud and colourful language, too colourful for radio, Father Simon. And then those fearful screams turned into screams of pain. We rushed to her, only to find, in her haste to get away from the clown, she'd fallen out of bed, bust her lip, and chipped her front tooth.
Oh, no.
I didn't know she was that scared. I thought that I would deny any knowledge of the clown and how it got there, but I realised I had to own up because there was no other culprit. And so I got the blame, and that was actually the beginning of the end of that relationship, I have to tell you. I beg the listeners' forgiveness. Best wishes from the gentleman who we're calling Timothy. I mean, I get a sense for these things, having done a few. My guess is very few people are going to forgive this.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people suffer from coulrophobia. A lot of people find clowns absolutely terrifying. And even if you didn't have coulrophobia, waking up in bed with an 6-foot inflatable clown would give you coulrophobia if you didn't have it before. Anyway, Sister Jackie Brambles.
I think I'm going to surprise you here, but just down to the sheer ingenuity, the dastardly, despicable thought, the investment of the money of buying the clown, all to stop someone who's just irritating the life out of you. There's a streak of admiration running right through that for me, so I'm forgiving him.
Wow.
Well, it was a slight glitch on your system there, but
Got there in the end.
we got there in the end, and everyone is quite stunned because
Yes.
there's forgiveness that's come from the Brambles house. Brother from another gutter.
Good to see that Jackie shares my morals, because I'm going to forgive as well. And the reason is she was after this free cab the whole time. Guess what? You have to pay the price sometimes. And one time that price turned out to be finding yourself in bed with an inflatable clown and also chipping your front tooth. Probably a little bit too much, maybe pushing it a bit too far there, Timothy. Turns out the relationship wasn't going to last anyway. So all's well that ends well, and you're forgiven.
So the relationship wasn't going to last anyway, but probably there was a slight provocateur sequence from
Maybe.
Timothy and his inflatable
Maybe
clown.
secretly he knew it wasn't going to last. That's why. Yeah.
People's
Maybe
verdict.
secretly he was sabotaging it all.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it's
Yeah.
all
about
about.
that.
61054, first word is Simon. Do you forgive Timothy? Yes or no? 61054, first word is Simon. Just before the news, we had Tuesday's confession, which came from Timothy, a shocking tale about how he got his own back on his his girlfriend's sister, who relied on him for late lifts when she'd been on the sherry. So he decided to buy a 6-foot clown and put it in her bed. And she already suffered from coulrophobia. Anyway, with shocking results, people's verdict.
Lucy in Chippenham not forgiven. He put the 6-foot inflatable clown in her bed. I was expecting him just to put it in the cab and scare her a bit. I think anyone would have freaked out waking up to a clown. Alistair in Mitcham says not forgiven. I totally understand Timothy being frustrated. I've been called upon every Friday night. However, putting a 6-foot clown in someone's bed really does seem a bit extreme. Paul Edney in Nissan says totally forgiven. After all, he was only clowning around. And finally, Penfold in Wakefield says forgiven. I don't understand these wimps who are afraid of clowns. It's moths you should be afraid of.
Really? Moths worse than clowns? Anyway.
Apparently.
Okay, phobia confessions, clown confessions, anything you've got. Send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Hello, Sister Jackie.
Hello. Yes, thank you very much indeed for inviting me back to the confessions. It's my little warm-up act for my show a bit later on when we've got the legend that is Leo Sayer, hopefully beaming in from Australia. We need a really long bit of string for this one tonight, folks. Fingers crossed.
Leo Sayer later. Okay, so tonight's confession comes from Anna, right? It says, Father Simon and the team, my name is Anna Flowers, but not really. So
Okay. Yeah.
So let's call her Anna Flowers. My confession relates to a mishap when my colleague and I were travelling back from a 2-day business trip to Guernsey. While sitting in the restaurant area of the very small departure lounge, my colleague and I decided it would be nice to have a civilised and relaxing glass of red wine whilst waiting for our flight to be called to board. I only had 2 types of wine to choose from. There was Merlot or Malbec. Being faced with such a difficult decision, and I didn't really know what I was talking about, I took my time, eventually decided on the Merlot. The server placed 2 small bottles of wine and 2 glasses onto the bar. I took the bottles and the 2 glasses to our table, promptly poured the whole contents of the small bottle into my glass. We'd been sat at the departure lounge for about 10 minutes when I heard our flight being called. I still had most of the wine in my glass, and I knew that there was no way I'd be able to drink it all before having to board the plane. My colleague just took a few glugs of wine and emptied his glass.
Wow.
I knew that I could not drink my wine in the same fashion as my colleague because I would have been ill. Panic. What to do? Then I had a brainwave. I thought, I had my water bottle. It was empty, and it was one of those you can't see through, and it had its own retractable straw. Perfect, I thought. No one will notice I have wine in there, and I can also have a sneaky drink on the plane without having to buy another costly bottle of wine from the cabin crew. Win, win, win. Plan hatched, I put my water bottle into my rucksack, boarded the aircraft, got settled in by the window seat and awaited takeoff. Once in the air, the cabin crew made their usual pass with the drinks and the snacks trolley. I declined a beverage, thinking smugly that I had my secret stash in my water bottle. Knowing that you are not allowed to drink your own alcohol on board a flight, I had to wait until the coast was clear and the cabin crew were out of sight, busying themselves with other important tasks. Only then could I take a sneaky sip from said water bottle without anyone noticing what was going on. I removed the water bottle from my rucksack and, keeping it low to the floor so no one would see me, I pulled open the drinking spout at the top of the bottle in great anticipation of taking a slip of my contraband. Imagine my horror, therefore, as a claret fountain gushed from the spout like a rocket being launched into space. In shock, mouth open and eyes on stalks, I stared at this fountain of red wine gushing from the spout for what seemed like an eternity. On and on it went. Eventually I closed the spout, but it was too late. There's wine everywhere. Luckily, the 2 seats in front of us were unoccupied, so all I had to do was to clean the back of the seats, which I set about doing with my baby wipes. The window and the casing was also completely drenched with red wine, so I hurriedly cleaned that up as well before anyone else noticed what had happened. I looked across to my colleague, who'd remained stock still and silent throughout the whole fiasco, observing my antics over the top of his reading glasses, reading book in hand, which was now drenched with red claret. Red and claret being the same word, never mind. My clothes were drenched in wine, my shoes and my rucksack too, so I set about wiping those with my wet wipes, satisfied that I had cleaned everything up. Visually, anyhow, the smell of alcohol was overpowering. I sat back and hoped that I had managed to avoid detection and would not get into trouble. As I sat back finally to relax for the remainder of the flight, my colleague nudged my arm and, without saying a word, nodded his head upwards, indicating for me to look up to the ceiling compartment where the lights, air vents and oxygen masks are secured. To my horror, the wine had reached every single nook and cranny of the ceiling compartment above us. How did it manage this? Again, I took to hastily cleaning the area with my wet wipes, who were working very, very hard.
Yeah.
My colleague then uttered the only words he spoke to me in the entire flight. He said, "Who'd have thought that a water container would build up so much pressure on an aeroplane at 36,000 feet?" He then went back to reading his book with newly decorated wine-soaked pages. Thanks for your help, mate. By the time I sat back to enjoy the flight, minus any wine I might add, we were beginning our descent to Leeds Bradford Airport. I'm sure that the small child who disembarked in front of us with a red stain on his rucksack had nothing to do with me. The car journey back to Doncaster was a long and quiet one. For weeks I couldn't get the taste or smell of wine out of my water bottle, and each time I drank from it I had the embarrassing reminder of my aeroplane mishap. There you go. So Simon, Matt, Susie, Jackie, Katie and whoever else is there, I am seeking forgiveness not only for sneaking wine onto a plane when I clearly knew I shouldn't, but also for causing the cleaning crew lots of extra work, and of course to my colleague whose book and trousers, as it became apparent as we stood to disembark the aircraft, had befallen my red wine escapades, resulting from me being a true Yorkshire woman and trying to save a pound or two. Well, I mean, that's exactly what Anna says, and that's that's not me. Anyway, it is a well-known fact that you're not allowed to take your own booze onto a plane. And so therefore I imagine Sister Jackie is going to be fairly harsh, but let's see.
I'm going to be harsh on 2 counts. First of all, the mountain of wet wipes, let's call it as an environmental disaster by itself. But more importantly, you should have done what any other thrifty traveller, call yourself a Yorkshire person, and knocked it back in the departure lounge, you silly sausage. Not forgiven.
Oh, right, so you finish the entire bottle before you get on the plane.
Definitely get on the
Of
plane with
course.
Jackie. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Brother from another gutter.
Yes, I mean, I really don't see anything to forgive here. I mean, the fact is, she got her own comeuppance, really, didn't she? She shouldn't have taken the Merlot on the flight, and then, it all literally blew up in her face, and then she did all the cleaning up as well. So, nothing to forgive. And actually, the one who I don't forgive is the colleague who didn't appear to find this. That was hilarious. How is that not hilarious? And he's just looking over his glasses, buried in a book.
It was all in his lap. That's
Giving
why
it
it wasn't
the
hilarious.
big I am. Oh, he's all over his trousers, I'm sure. Comes out with a bit of white wine over the red wine on the trousers. Yes, definitely forgiven.
Okay, all right. Well, it's forgiveness from Matt.
Yep.
No forgiveness from Sister Jackie. It all comes down to the people's verdict. So, forgiven or not for Anna, who's not really Anna. What do you say? Forgiveness 61054. First word is Simon. So tonight's confession came from Anna Flowers, but not really, who, even though she knew it was wrong, she couldn't bear to waste almost a full glass of wine, poured it into her water bottle, which was empty. And then when she took it on the plane, obviously because of the air pressure thing, she was trying to have a surreptitious little drink. And instead she got a complete fountain of claret, which went absolutely everywhere, as these things tend to do. Anyway, and she wanted a lot of forgiveness. Also, apparently, the aircraft upholstery was cream, and so therefore everything
really?
showed up rather spectacular. It also ended up in the lap of her chum, who she was travelling with. Anyway, the people's verdict is in, and it has been selected. Here it is.
So Jay in Aberdeen says, forgiven, maybe I'm the only one on this, but I would never have thought that the air pressure in the plane would cause such a fountain of mess. Totally forgive. Not forgiven, though, says Helen in Milton Keynes. The stain on the poor boy's backpack, the red wine on the book, so much mess caused, I can't forgive. But Michelle in Leeds says, forgiven. I totally forgive Anna. I would have absolutely done the same. You don't want to waste a good bottle of wine. Wet wipes really can clean up anything. So I'm sure there was no trace of it on the plane by the end.
Oh, okay, so that's a cheery and optimistic way of looking at it. So a little bit of forgiveness heading Anna's way. She certainly gets the smart speaker, and if you fancy one, send your confession to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Today's confession comes from Clive. It goes like this. Father Simon, as an impressionable young person, I was convinced that I'd be a chef. Not just any chef, but a TV chef. What a grand life. What a grand life it would be. Your own TV show, your own best-selling books. You could swear at people and people think it's funny. Kitchen full of admiring staff and a signature chocolate ganache that would mean men and women swoon at your feet. And all this, Father Simon, because of the TV show Ready, Steady, Cook, which I absolutely loved. So anyway, back to reality and fast forward to my GCSE years and my options. I decided to pick home economics, which quickly changed to food technology or food tech. But anyway, always a passport to glamour. But one fateful Wednesday afternoon, I turned up to my food tech class, realising that I had forgotten my cooking ingredients. Now, not wanting to get another school detention and explaining to my mum why she'd have to be picking me up again an hour later than the bus, I approached my teacher, Miss Arbuthnot, and explained that I didn't have my cooking ingredients. But before she had time to shout at me, I explained that my dad had lost his job and getting the ingredients was unfortunately the least of my mum and dad's financial worries. This, of course, was a lie. My dad was working full-time as a plumber, as he had been all my life. I might have hammed this up a little bit. My eyes might have been redder than usual. My lips may have trembled. Miss Arbuthnot was normally a very hard woman, ferocious indeed, and didn't particularly like the cheeky, chappy personality I displayed regularly in her class. However, my story was clearly good enough and my acting basic enough, and Miss Arbuthnot suddenly softened and said for me not to worry, and all I had to do was to write out 5 recipes that I wanted to complete for my GCSE assignment. I couldn't believe that it had worked, and I dodged the detention. I sat there during my 90-minute lesson and I wrote out the 5 things I'd like to make for my assessment. Most of them, your Nigel would be more than happy to present on a Thursday, as he's about to do. I handed it in and I forgot all about it. Move on a week and I arrive again, having forgotten my cooking ingredients. I was beginning to suspect that being a chef was never going to work for me. I walk into class knowing that I wasn't going to be able to avoid another detention for another week. I took my seat and my classmates started getting their aprons on and prepping workstations. Shuffling around in my bag, pretending to be busy, Miss Arbuthnot approached and explained that she had all the ingredients I needed for my assessment and would I like to have them. Father Simon, I had to keep up this charade for a whole number of weeks as she told me the next 5 assessment meals would be taken care of, that when a member of the school family was in difficulties, everyone should rally round. Had my father found a job yet? No, he hadn't. That must make things really rough at home. Yes, it certainly does. And so on for week after week after week. Now, the reason I'm asking for forgiveness is because I told my own children this story as my daughter is doing her own food tech GCSE this summer. And I'm worried that they might spill the beans to my mum, who still does not know the truth of it all. If I can gain some forgiveness from you and the team and the listeners, then I'm sure my mum will be able to forgive me. I mean, to be honest, whatever we say and whatever the listeners say, I think is going to be completely irrelevant. I think what your mum says is going to be the key thing here. Okay, so Clive needs some forgiveness. Does he get it from the very hard taskmaster of Sister Jackie Brambles?
Miss Arbuthnot was on a teacher's wage, which, back in the day was not great. So, no, you're not forgiven for your endless fibs that cost her a fortune supplying you with your ingredients. Definitely no forgiveness.
Did Miss Arbuthnot actually pay for them herself? She may well have done. Who knows?
I would have thought so.
Certainly taking advantage of kind-hearted Miss A, brother from another gutter.
Well, I'm going to forgive, and I think we need to say that obviously Clive thought on his feet there, didn't he? He did very well coming up with this excuse for why he'd forgotten the ingredients. And when you think about it, it is a little absurd that we're expecting the students to turn up with, you're carrying flour and eggs around in your school bag all day, and then just turn up to be able to make a Victoria sponge. That sounds a bit strange to me. Maybe it's the system that's at fault. Yes, there you go. It's the system's problem. Yes. I've alighted on a perfect defence. So for that reason, I'm going to forgive. And didn't everyone rally round and all felt very good about ourselves? So yes, definitely forgiven.
Well, they did rally round, but they rallied round for no reason at all.
Well, because of the
It's
system.
all based on a lie.
Yeah. Well, we've heard that before.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, Jackie Brambles will be with you at 7 o'clock. Don't forget. The people's verdict is all important. Do you forgive Clive, yes or no? On the text, please, 61054, and the first word is Simon. Coincidentally, today's title for our confession came from Clive, who basically lied to his cookery teacher, pretending that his father had lost his job. She took sympathy on him and basically gave him a pass on all the prep that everyone else was doing, but no, not Clive. Anyway, the people's verdict is in, and here it comes.
So Mitch in St Ives says, not forgiven. The teacher was so lovely and caring. I feel bad for her. But Curito from Peckham says, I have to agree with Matt. It's the system that's at fault.
Yes.
You shouldn't have to pay for the ingredients. And Craig from Buckingham says, absolutely forgiven. In home economics back in the day in Scotland, I had to make a cheese and tomato pizza. No mozzarella or sunblushed tomatoes back in the 90s, let me tell you. Canned tomatoes and grated cheddar. Temperature in the oven wasn't calibrated, so the dough was burnt to a crisp. Best heartburn ever.
Okay, so maybe you have a confession, maybe you have a cooking-based confession, maybe a home economics confession, maybe something from the kitchen. Anyway, you send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk.